All right, everybody. Welcome to the show. Welcome back. Welcome back. After that PSA, it's so good to have you all. Welcome. We've got Samuel Loncar in the house. How's it going, man?
Hey, great. Great to be here, Dave. Happy New Year. How's it been going? What's been going on in the conversation?
Happy New Year's. So in the conversation so far, we've had a bunch of different guests on, and I've been going since 6 a.m. So Nancy, you've been here the whole time, right? So how long have we been doing this? For 7 hours now.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then
philosophical aesthetics in the old ways.
There'll be two more. We also, I ended up doing like this impromptu lecture on New Year's goal planning, using New Year's resolution energy, because we all feel some kind of motivation, as a sort of inroad to talking about time energy theory and capital, ultimately. I had Daniel Garner from OG Rose on talking about Ivan Illich and disablement and real reading versus the sort of trivia reading we tend to do and that we're taught in school. And that was an amazing conversation, and it was, it's a big part of why I wanted you at this point of the conversation. We also just got off with Nina Power, who was on here talking about these sort of sacrificial cancellations that make people examples, blah, 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 as well as like the importance of dialogue, of dialectics, and of thinking about human futures. And I'll use the human futures thread to kind of set you up to go, because this is important to a lot of your work. But basically, is there such a thing as a human future? Do you actually hold out hope for a human future? And also, would it be instead like human futures, like as in like pluralizing that? These are some of the kinds of things that we're talking about, and in particular, using the controversy today around, like, say, what it is to be a woman. These are complicated issues. Obviously, being an adult female or male is not enough for people to respect you as a woman or a man in the first place. And in that sense, it's very easy for people who don't hold our values to see us as nothing but overgrown children, right? This is a sort of like, oh, you're a man child. Oh, you don't have X, Y, and Z boxes checked. And so this gender debate is interesting at that level, because it speaks to the breakdown of norms, expectations, and rites of passage. But on the other side, when we think of nature itself and whether nature actually has a role in sexuation, or when nature actually has something to do with the way that gender formations take, that was kind of that conversation. But what that sets the stage for is a different conversation that's related, which is really the struggle to be human and make sense of what it is to be human for the next 200 to 1,000 years as we become increasingly more cybernetic. And so the fact that it's so dangerous to talk about these kinds of complex issues at this point in our history is concerning, because it's very early into where we're going with the cybernetic revolution, and what we could say is like probably the transhumanist revolution. And there's a million different directions that can go. And Nance was here kind of, I called him our resident cyborg person. Like he's ready to upload his consciousness. He's ready to get the chip. He's ready to be a robot, but he's also conflicted. And we have debates about this kind of thing. But your project is called Becoming Human. And so human means something important to you. And within the context of what I take to be the biggest question of the next 1,000 years, what is it to be human, and what is your project all about?
Oh, all the small questions at once. It is a huge question, and I think you're right about the concern about that. It can even be dangerous this early to talk about these things. So, well, I'll try to get at that. But I think the direct question makes me think of a great quote from G.K. Chesterton. I just read a great essay on Chesterton by Simon Lay, who, I don't know if you know him. He was he just recently passed away. He was a brilliant Australian sinologist. He was an expert in Chinese art history, and he was also just a terrific essayist. But I hadn't thought about Chesterton for a long time. But I'll adapt a quote from Chesterton about Christianity, about humanity, which is, humanity hasn't been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and left untried. So transhumanism is fundamentally what happens when you have an incredibly philosophically lazy culture with an enormous amount of financial and technological power. And then you get essentially infantile conceptualizing with nuclear and beyond level power resource allocation to those same infantile concepts. And that's very important, because I don't mean that as a put down. I mean, if you're thinking about this just psychoanalytically and you ask yourself, per your question about adulthood and maturation and what human adults are, there's actually a really deep question, which is, are we in general talking to adults or children? Which raises the question of, like, what is an adult and a child? And in the modernist progressivist narrative that underlies transhumanism, there's a contempt for gendered women and of any kind, a contempt for the trans movement, like you can see in Elon Musk, a contempt for children in a certain sense. Not in the sense that every like good tech dad is not in some ways a kind of conservative, but there's a general contempt of children in the history of male culture, because children are embarrassing to men. They don't understand them. They're the world of women. They don't want to think about when they were children because power is important to male masculine culture constructs. So ultimately, actually, there's a deep issue here about what is the child. And that brings us right to the new year. And I think this is connected to humanity very, very deeply, because I'm teaching a course right now, the first public course in the philosophy of science I've taught, on Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions. That's my current course on YouTube. And it's going to set up my kind of critical social epistemology work for the public. And one of the things I've been struck by about Kuhn, like this is the lecture I'm about to record today, I think lecture 5 in the series, is about novelty. Really, the entire history of science and the problem it poses is how you make sense of novelty when the concept of knowledge is that you got it right and therefore it doesn't need to change. So you see, you can take the concept of novelty and put it through any axis in philosophy, whether epistemology, philosophy of science, ethics, and it's a problem. If you figured things out, the future shouldn't be different unless it's catastrophically bad. And from that standpoint, you generate immediately what isn't a conservative impulse. It's a very traditional impulse. It's not conservative. I'm also preparing a course on Dugin that I hope to be ready to teach by 2025.
No. What?
So I'm reading a ton of Dugin, and because he's important, but this is something I'm very struck by, is Dugin as a Russian philosopher is very sensitive to the radicality of the idea of novelty being normal. And he sees this as very Western and extremely modern, which is very true. And it's also a very deep theological difference. There's a kind of apocalyptic philosophical movement in antiquity that we call part of now Christianity. But Eastern Orthodoxy isn't like that. Eastern Orthodoxy is much more traditionally Platonic. And what's good is eternal or unchanging or somehow united to that. And so the question about what's good about anything new is, to me, the ultimate question moderns should force themselves to ask, because it's the one we take for granted, but it's the one that makes us the weirdos in the whole history of society and human culture. And so I think transhumanism is partly a frightening impulse that a child reacts to very rationally as a child, which is the future is uncontrollable. I can't even comprehend the present. I know fuck all about the past. And so the only way I can psychologically stabilize my world is to imagine that I can unilaterally construct the future out of my own agency. So I view this psychoanalytically as, first of all, transhumanism is a very scared psychic child. The modern human is incredibly infantile, I think, in terms of and there's an enormous regressive motion when you get towards apocalyptic cultural downturns like we're in, where the economy is very unstable and only really wealthy people can capitalize on that instability. So I think transhumanism in that sense is a truly new form of religion, like the UFO movement, because we need a type of assurance in the face of the incomprehensibility of the world that we have partly inherited, that we don't understand, and created. And I think, therefore, focusing on why the concept of humanity is already trying to be transcended, when the people who want to transcend it clearly haven't understood it in any sense. They can't give you the most minimum accurate account of why did the concept of humanity emerge? What's unique about it, right? So that's a lot, but maybe I'll just stop there with a kind of scattershot response, where I think those are some of the big thematic issues actually connected: novelty, kind of the psychological issue of maturity and what we're really dealing with philosophically, and how do we respectfully acknowledge that sometimes we are talking to infants without being condescending, because we recognize sometimes maybe we're being an infant and we don't know it, when someone's, say, triggering a kind of complex, if you want to use that language. But I do think it's a grave mistake to treat transhumanism as the product of mature, well-adjusted minds. That is a grave mistake. Transhumanism is the product of a kind of unbelievably masculine culture that has very little emotional self-understanding, very little understanding of the world of nature, very little understanding of the world of the body, and very little understanding of the world of human history. It's the kind of incredible bias of engineering culture taken to the nth degree, combined with the crudest forms of Enlightenment Christian eschatology.
Ooh, that's good shit. Now, I know Nance is probably brimming with a bunch of things, and I hope, Nance, that you'll take a couple of bullet points here of as far as questions you'd like to ask for your, on your own, as well as points that you might want to, bring to the table. But really quick, I just want to say that this ties in really good with what we were just talking about, which is the structural stultification of our time energy, which is a collective communal precondition for what becomes the organization of labor, power, exploitation, exchange, and consumption in society. And it is, also the precondition for being able to do any of the things that you see over there on the whiteboard. I was on the whiteboard using I have another camera, it's malfunctioning, but I'm able to stand there at the whiteboard and do stuff. And so we've got these different areas like physical health, intellectual health, mental health, emotional health, music. I don't, not health. A lot of these that I'm saying are health, they're actually spheres of life, and it's not just about health, it's also about challenges, genuine challenges, physical challenges, resistance from the real, something that makes you, it's a trial of the real in a sort of sense, in terms of say physical exertion that tests you and pushes you beyond anything that you knew was possible, right? But it's also humbling because you discover that you're not the Superman that you thought that you were when you tried to do X, Y, or Z things in the physical realm, but also the intellectual comprehensive realm is also something that you can push your comfort zone on, and you can actually take on extreme challenges. Well, a healthy, well-rounded person, or at least a person who gets to autonomously choose the ways that they endanger their health by taking on crazy challenges, should be able to alternate between these various options. And that it wouldn't just be the intellectual and the physical, but it would also be, you'd also be able to work on presence and meditation and yoga and slacklining and musical instruments and practicing multiple languages and not just reading philosophy and difficult books, but also you could do literature and who knows, maybe poetry and, you gotta go down the list. And so when, talking about the new year and the sort of the natality of feeling like it's a new chapter. This is, in a sort of sense, we can tap into the potential of the child and do something new, versus this sort of infantilized, structurally stultified and functionally illiterate disposition that we're put in, that we've become used to, that we've internalized, that we've made not just to feel normal but natural, to the point that we actually think it's reality. This is the landscape, and this is what we've been talking about. And so, you came right in not knowing what we're talking about. You fit right into it. The whole stream is just this beautiful unity. And so, thank you. But I guess I want you to elaborate a little bit on this idea that ultimately the reason that people, these maladjusted, we'll call them cyber tech bros, who think they've got it all figured out and they are ready to throw the baby, the human, out with the bathwater, and full steam ahead with the techno capital singularity future that they want to try to bring into reality. What is for you the human? I want to bring it back to that. What is you basically you've set it up to be because you didn't say functionally illiterate, but because they're functionally illiterate, they're not able to comprehend this thing, human, and they don't know why it came about. And I guess I'm really curious myself. Why has it come about, and what is this thing that they do not understand? And I know at a certain level you can't tell a person what they don't understand, but also maybe you could kind of pave a picture as to how would we get there to being able to understand this.
That's a really good and hard question. I think the human is the apocalyptic event that we are all afraid of destroying us, and without which we all feel our lives are definitively meaningless. And the human event is so condensing of the general power of reality, which is the terror that we fear, right? Reality is the rumor that we know is going to destroy us because our lives are filled with illusions. And because we don't know the space between our illusions and our lies and our truths, if reality were to come in and just say, well, now it's all me, it's all the real, it's a death. And we fear that rationally. We fear the death of what we consider the construct of our ego, the death of sort of Neo sort of losing Mr. Anderson is the simplest way to put it. Whereas the Matrix isn't focused on that, but you could tell the same story focused on the residual trauma of, right, thinking that you're still this person. And the scene in the movie actually where he passes the noodle shop, one of the great scenes, the typical green contrast as they come out of the blue of the Matrix coloring. And he says, I used to go to that noodle shop. He's like, what does that mean? Trinity says, it means that your past can't tell you who you are. That's actually essentially connected to this problem. I think, to not be unfair to, as you said, like tech bros, these are very accomplished people. And I want to be very clear about the fact that I think there is a big culture tension that's related to C.P. Snow's famous two culture essay about the culture of the so-called humanities and the sciences. So this is a really complicated issue. I do think there is a culture of people who can actually do math for money. So just put it simply, it's like math for money. Engineers, people who can do the hard sciences where you have to have significant mathematical abilities. You have to have not been a fucker up in college. You have to have done 4 to 8 hours of homework every day to pass 2 to 3 years of calculus courses, which is not the humanities. Okay, I did the humanities and I have worked very hard, but I am completely aware there is a major cultural difference. You cannot BS your way through advanced math courses the way you can BS your way through a 400 level English course at any university. And so that has led to a kind of contempt on the part of the science and engineering and math culture of both, the West broadly, but specifically it's an Anglophone phenomenon. German, I don't think the German context is like this or the French context in the same way. And I want to respect this because I don't want to seem, it can seem very denigrating. Oh, here's some philosophers saying all these people who are, building rockets are just like these infantile people. Well, you could say the reaction is also infantile. And this is the problem, is if I were forced to choose sides, which I would not want to do, I would end up looking way closer to transhumanists than people who don't know a lot of my work might think. And the reason is the transhumanists know one thing about humans, which is that they know we're something like God. So this is the remnant of the Judeo-Christian Platonic heritage. What is philosophy according to Plato? Plato says famously, in the Theaetetus, through the Socrates, the purpose of philosophy is to become as much like the divine as possible. That is the purpose of philosophy. Philosophy is the way of life which leads you to be able to confront death with equanimity and become as like a god. So ultimately, this is the first major problem. Is I think transhumanism is right about that. So to answer your question directly, but in two parts, that's the first half. What is a human? A human is a god and an animal, which is therefore neither of those things, but could become something different than either of them as we understand them. And then the traditional way to put that is we're the linguistic animal, which, right, where we are the animal that's capable of doing what we're doing, which is rationally reflecting on our nature and altering it in the process. This is not something we see evidence of in any other animal kingdom. We do not see evidence of animals self-consciously or even inadvertently radically redirecting the formation of their evolution. And so I think we have to be very scientific, and that's the first thing I want to start with. There's a bunch of pseudoscience, I think, in the humanities and theories world that pays no attention to the natural sciences. I pay a ton of attention to the natural sciences, and I work with natural scientists because I respect science. Obviously, I think there's an ideology around it being total, but so what are humans? Well, animalistically speaking, we're a very unique animal. We're the animal that's thinking about and categorizing all the other animals. We're the animal that's doing quantum field theory. We're the animal that's wondering how physics relates to math, right? We're the animal that's capable of understanding what happened within milliseconds after the Big Bang to a degree of exactitude, which is astounding. That's the kind of animal we are, and that's the kind of animal that people in transhumanism see us to be, and they think, what the fuck is animal about that? Let's go all in on math god. So I think behind transhumanism, there's a very deep, serious conversation, which almost never takes place, which is about the philosophy of mathematics and what the significance is that humans can do math. I've been watching a ton of physicists, just with something I do for fun, but also connected to the Kuhn lectures I'm doing. And I'm very struck by the fact that physicists, because they're mathematicians today, they really are very Platonic, whether they know it or not. And people who are in the humanities generally don't recognize the significance of the fact that we can do math and that it describes the natural world. Whereas if you read the famous essay by Eugene Wigner on I forgot the word he uses, the famous adjective, about the improbable success of mathematics and the physical sciences. This is a huge problem. So here's how I think about humanity then, about the animal side, is I think what we're living through is a kind of 2,500 to 3,000 years slow burn answer to a set of debates that were going on in the ancient world, not just in Greece. They were also going on in China. If you look in China, if you look at the Zhuangzi, the text and the author, who's traditionally thought to be the great disciple of Lao Tzu of the Tao Te Ching, there's an amazing translation of his book by Bruce Siporin, I think, at Chicago. And it's a kind of compendium in this totally genius way that I think you only see in Chinese philosophy that I know of all of the philosophical schools and debates. So, Confucius, all these people appear, the old man, Lao Tzu. And the debates are literally happening around the exact same time that the Platonic Academy is being founded in Greece, in terms of that's the traditional dating, 4th century before the Common Era. If you look at Plato and you say, okay, what happened in terms of our context, which is we have mathematical science, which has produced nuclear energy and artificial intelligence and the possibility of transhumanism. How did that happen? Math is the simplest shorthand answer. We applied math and realized it described everything, basically, which made some people think, well, that's everything that we are. Somehow we are fundamentally not material, or whatever a number is. We're more like that than we are like this. And if you say, okay, let's go back in ancient philosophy, what were the philosophical schools' positions on these issues? Take the Epicureans. A book I won't name because I don't want to embarrass a Harvard professor. A book won the Pulitzer Prize for suggesting as one of the stupidest modernity narratives ever to come out in public in the last 30 years, and there's a lot of those. A book came out suggesting that the rediscovery of Lucretius's De Rerum Natura catalyzed the emergence of modernity's great scientific achievements. There's amazing things about Epicureanism, not least Lucretius's De Rerum Natura, which is an amazing epic philosophical poem. Lucretian science is absolute bullshit. Lucretius was the Epicurean school was the most anti-scientific, dogmatic, and anti-mathematical school. They had the most insanely laughable account of mathematics and science that they were routinely mocked by everyone, from the Platonists, the skeptics, the Stoics. You can look this up. And so that's one of the things I remember when I heard about this book, I couldn't even fathom the ignorance of the scholarship on Epicureanism that this author had to have to propose. As interesting as this wonderful story is about the Italian rediscovery of this manuscript, that's all great writing. It's fantastic. But the intellectual content of that book is so risibly stupid that's the kind of situation we're in, because the only ancient philosophical school that claimed that reality would be describable at a fundamental level by mathematical objects were the Pythagoreans and the Platonists, and they were obviously fucking right. So for the past 400 years, what created transhumanism is the success of the scientific revolution, which is from the time of Plato's Academy. In the next 150 years, you get most of the greatest developments in pure mathematics in history until the modern period. And it comes out of the Platonic Academy. If people don't know this, it is so important they realize the Platonic Academy really was a kind of research university, in the sense that the academy is what influenced the tradition that the elements of Euclid were part of, and the development of mathematical astronomy, which the ancient Greeks had to a very high level, was very influenced by Plato's ideas of math. Because Plato, of course, famously, in a Just So story, he's very humble about it, but he ends up describing the world as composed of three-dimensional triangular objects in the Timaeus. In other words, he proposes a mathematical physics as the fundamental way to do cosmology, that you describe the physical world through mathematical objects. It took until Galileo and what we call the scientific revolution, until modern Latin culture broadly began to realize, oh, actually, these low arts that we dismissed, that we didn't even call philosophy, the precursor word for science, these low arts like mechanics, which those grunts do who build the cathedrals, these are actually the fundamental new sciences. So Galileo's two new sciences, one of the new sciences is Galileo says, look, mechanics, the art of mechanics is actually really important. Now what he called mechanics, we call mathematical physics. But Galileo had to make the case, and it took over 100 years of the development from Galileo to Newton and the discovery with calculus in conjunction with the cosmological innovation that tied together what Kepler and Galileo had done over the past 100 years. It took all of that work before it became definitively clear at the end of the 17th century, in the beginning of the 18th century, that math was the language of the universe. And here is the true fact. There is basically a whole group of people from then to now who ignore this fact, and they do not think it's philosophically important, and they are stupid. They are really stupid, those people. And I'm not saying they're stupid as people, but this part of their position as philosophical output is twaddle. And the reason that theory has been so dismissed, unfortunately, because I don't think it's been fair exactly, is because if you're on the other side of that debate where you're the engineers, and I've had people who were former rocket scientists in my classes who worked in high tech in Silicon Valley, these people just can't take seriously human beings who pontificate about the large questions of the cosmos, who don't seem to recognize that every time they fly on a plane or use their computer, they're using this really advanced stuff that the deepest people who think about wonder, how is this even possible? How is this even possible? So the question of how we as animals who are murderous and bestial have these godlike abilities, I respect transhumanism for actually saying, here's our answer to that question. We forgot the rest of it. We don't know anything about the animal part. We don't know the history I just said, but they are engaging. They are right in the sense that they're de facto on the Platonic side. They think we can be more than human bodies or animals, but they don't have any account of the goodness of what the world is. And so I think the real crisis is, in order to combat a bad theology, you need a true theology, and we have no theology. We have taught ourselves that because atheism rules the world since the 19th century, that we don't need theology. And to me, this is the greatest mistake. The person who needs theology the most is an atheist. If you don't believe in God, then you must be aware of what it is that is so powerful that you don't think exists that everyone else does. And if you don't believe in someone else's God, like say you're a Christian, you don't believe that the God of, I don't think this is true, but many Christians don't think Allah of Islam is the same God as the God of the Christian Trinity. Well, you should wonder then, why does Islam still respect Jesus as a prophet, for example? There's these weird, arcane questions. And most of the transhumanist discussion isn't oriented in this, but if we get interested in why do we have such a deep debate about humanity, it's because actually there's a really deep cultural divide that's been going on since the Renaissance between people. And I'm not saying people can do math. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not a physicist, but I am very aware as a philosopher of the importance of these things. And I'm very aware of the very smart people who have thought deeply about them. And they're the people that, frankly, they might dismiss transhumanism too. It's definitely a kind of engineering magic project. But the other side of the humanities, they need to give an account of why transhumanism emerges and is working. And I think the reason they can't do that well enough without being reductive, which was maybe how I sounded in the beginning about the infantile psychology, which is real, is, again, give an infant godlike mathematical powers. I mean, they're going to be kind of tyrannical in some ways. And we see that Newton was not a pleasant person. There are a lot of geniuses who weren't like the nicest people, but you can't deny their godlike abilities. And so I think we're actually stuck. And what I want to do in my work is move people towards saying we need an open debate done by philosophers, not the academic theologians. They can join in if they want. But I mean a debate by real philosophers, people like us who are living this stuff. Whatever else we're doing, we're living the project of philosophy as a way of life. We need to recognize theology is the essential discipline that we have to be prepared to engage in order to resolve the issue of humanity, because humanity is an apocalypse. It is an unveiling of something that we don't know, that we're trying to understand, and that we're terrified of recognizing is real, which is what we truly are. So the metaphysical answer to what is the human is, it is the answer to the question, what you truly are. Whatever the answer to that question is, human is the name for it. That's at least a sort of not exactly an answer, but I would say, therefore, the animal that can become a terrible beast with the power of a god, or a god that could refashion the cosmos or shape it into a better thing, that's the sort of thing we are. So we are, you could say, like Sartre famously said, we are a vain wish. I don't think we're a vain wish, but the idea that we're in enormous tension, like in Heidegger, between a finite being that's aware of its finitude and something that clearly transcends that, which I think Heidegger suppressed that part of himself. But his early life, that's what he was obsessed with, the mathematical logic part. And then I think you see in Heidegger's own biography almost our cultural split. He had it in both in himself. He knew mathematics, he knew logic. He used to be a kind of more orthodox Husserlian, and then he really came under the spell of time. And the apocalyptic dimension of Heidegger completely obscures the mathematical immaterial dimension. And that is, I think, part of why we're stuck, because the most interesting philosophers have some of the most confusing premises for these issues, but we all rightly want to engage them. And so I think we need to clear the field. We need to keep understanding what we're already interested in, but we need to say we don't live in a secular age. We live in an age full of new gods and old gods fighting and dying and being born. And history is the history of the decomposition of the gods. And people who are not involved in that history are just living inside of some dead god's body that they carved out. So the transhumanists, just like secular liberals, they're just living inside of this Christian, Jewish eschatology that they have no real deep concern for. If you presented it as doctrine, they would say they don't believe it, and they literally spend their entire life doing everything they can to advance it. That's a really weird phenomenon when you think of it that way. It's very weird. And so why we're so obsessed with thinking it's taboo to talk about religion because it'll make us religious is that's itself a psychological problem. I can't resolve that for anyone. They can talk to their therapist. It's more, I'm just talking as an intellectual in this respect as a scholar, which is theology is what we need to recognize the debate about humanity is about. It's about how you think about being divine in the miserable and damaging and dangerous condition that humanity finds itself, I think.
Well, thank you. I think that just about takes care of this stream. I had a couple more guests, but I might just cut it off here. I'm going to go think about that for a while. Mainly, I'm going to quit my job and then go study math and theology because I think I fucked up. Yeah, Nance, what are you going to say there?
So I've been reading Ben Goertzel. I don't know, Samuel, if you know, he's an artificial intelligence guy. He's actually responsible for coining the term artificial general intelligence. I've been reading him recently along with Negarestani, trying to figure stuff out. And I noticed reading Goertzel, I need to study math. Like I absolutely have to study some math to be at least aware of what he's talking about, what's going on. Yeah, it makes me feel feeble to just like, I feel like I have a grasp on what's going on when we do this humanity stuff, but when it comes down to the hard sciences, listening to a serious person talk about it, it's intimidating because it's, and I don't know, the question of is math, is it discovered? Is it a construct? I don't know. That's a question I think I go back and forth on it. Like, is it something that we discover, or is it something that we kind of co-create maybe? And I think the answer might be some type of co-creation, which becomes more interesting when you add the element of theology, right? Which is, admittedly, it's a subject I don't like to talk about. I'm over it, or have been over it. It is uncomfortable, and trying to define why it makes me uncomfortable is itself an interesting exercise, right? Like it is all these things, but I think it does kind of put the ball back, from my perspective, puts the ball back in my court. I have to take it seriously. I can't hide from myself.
Yeah, I'm about to step away, and I wanted Nance to be able to respond to more of what you've done here, or ask you some questions of his own, because I know he's got a lot, and we will not have time to get to everything. We've got about 20 more minutes here. Really, actually, 17. So, but I'll just say that, like, I have only been able to study to the degree that I have been able to study over the last over a decade at this point. Because I've bracketed out the mathematical sciences, and I've done it mostly because it's a time and energy thing. There are fundamental questions that I take to be the most important questions. I do not have the answers to. I'm interested in how to even formulate the questions, and so, you know, for instance, going back to Heidegger, you know, I'm preparing for a lecture on Heidegger. It sounds like we just got a part of your lecture on Kuhn a little bit later. Maybe I want to be in that course now. You know, I want to sign me up. I'm down for all of that. But he's not just bracketing out the natural attitude and the mathematical sciences in what he does. He is also doing that, but Husserl to some degree was already doing that. Husserl was a lot more into math and logic, as you were saying, and so Heidegger had his phase there. But I think there's some kind of credence to telling a person that they can suspend concern with, the being beaten over the head with the shovel of math for at least a decade. But at some point, you've got to get back to it. And I've definitely been feeling the need to get back to it more recently. But the reason that you can bracket out math to some degree is because it is not ever the background conditions of intelligibility. Or if it is, we don't know how to actually articulate it in language, right? And we are creatures of language. And I think that you talked about animality, and they don't understand this. And my instant thought is, well, they're all like evil psych guys. They like evolutionary psychology, and so. But what I would say is that they don't understand language. They tend to, for instance, we were talking about this earlier. Like someone takes the negation of a negation to be a positive. It's like, well, that's true in logic and in math. It's not true in language. If I say I'm Antifa and I'm anti-fascist, that doesn't make sense to somebody who's only ever thought about negation in mathematical or logical terms. But when someone says, "Oh my God, you can't use a double negative in grammar," it's like, yeah, but actually, me saying I'm not a Christian or I'm not whatever. If you do that, that's saying a lot more than people who don't understand language tend to think it is. And so I don't know. There's some kind of bracketing going on, and I am curious to see what you'll make of that, as well as the evil psych connection. But also, I don't want to hog what I take to be an opportunity here for Nance to engage with you on this level. But I have to step away, so you two kind of do with it what you will. I'll be listening through my headphones, so be good. I'll be right back.
All right, sure. Yeah, I'll start just responding to this. I mean, I totally agree. I think we're in a unique moment that we can talk about this like humbly together, which is I also, right, I didn't do a lot of math and I didn't think I was good at it. And then I was reading Quine when I was a teenager, and I read, about half or a quarter, a third of his elementary logic book, which was, just a book on formal logic. And I found that really wonderful and somehow easy. And in my mind at the time as a teenager, I was home educated. I didn't connect that with math. Obviously it was mathematical. I recognized now. So I do think I don't want to trigger the whole math education thing, which is I think math has to be the worst taught important subject in all of history. And I don't think those of us who don't do math should feel like because we don't know any math, we can't think about these things. I think though your desire is like mine. It's like, the Platonic don't enter here unless you know geometry. That thing I think is a good thing for us philosophers to take seriously as part of our cultivation. Well, let's learn what we can without pretending maybe we're going to be any kind of specialists and I think that is a good attitude, because I think, and this is something I think a lot about, but I feel like you can't talk about this, but we're talking about it, so it's good. But McKerracher does talk about it because he's okay being kind of, I think, pretty arch, and he doesn't care what. I think there's a part of him that's like a Trotskyite troll throughout his whole career. And in After Virtue, Alistair McKerracher does mention a study, which may have been spurious, I don't know, but that basically there is a kind of math envy that distributes itself in the intellectual world. Social scientists, he claims, are less intelligent and based on IQ than hard scientists and humanists, etc. Now, I don't know if that's true, but I think what is true is we all tend to feel psychologically vulnerable where we are ignorant. And when someone threatens us with that same vulnerability, it causes resentment. And that's actually why I framed the beginning of my remarks in terms of psychoanalysis, psychotherapeutic analysis. And the reason is because I do think that the infantile part of the people who are math engineering strong, but don't have a strong grasp on the world of normal language, verbal language, they would say, obviously, they do a different language or just math. And I think the connection between those two languages is one of the great questions of what the logos means. And I think that is, to me, part of the problem with Heidegger's answers. Dave's right. He's doing more than bracketing them. but you can't bracket ultimately them. At the end, you have to recognize somehow this is all an expression of logos. And I think that is a tension. People don't like people saying you're dumb because you don't know what I know, especially if you don't know what they know. And so I'm not saying we're justified as humanists in overreacting, but obviously there are a lot of tech and math people whose whole purpose in life is to make people who can't do math or engineering or science feel stupid. And that is stupid. I've had friends in physics and math, and they've said, look, what you do seems as intimidating, to me as that does to you. So I'm sure that your knowledge, Nance, of specialized theory and philosophy, it is as in some ways as technically forbidding. It would take years to learn, just like it would take us years to learn calculus from starting wherever we were in high school or college. And I think having a kind of open humility about, I don't know this, it's very possible that because I don't know it, and some people try to beat me up with that, I'm overreacting. I've had to work a lot on that, like in my 20s and in my early 30s. And as a philosopher, I do think that's a lot of what's going on that you can't say because it's so undiscussable. It's not polite to say. The reason a lot of humanists and theorists are using all this fancy math and science language, like you see in French theory, is because they're insecure relative to the people who can actually manipulate those symbols properly. And I think that's part of the so-called affair. That whole world is very much, I think, kind of ground zero for the psychological issues that we're talking about. But I think if we bracket them, the issue you raised, Nance, about, well, what actually is math? That's something that I think all of us, I hope, can come to like wonder at. Because I do think the more I study science as a kind of non-professional, I am in awe. I'm in awe of the conditions of the intelligibility of the universe, per what Dave was saying. But math is part of the conditions of the intelligibility of the universe, or more fundamentally, form is, or pattern. And so I think, and pattern seems to foreclose novelty in certain ways. And I think that's connected to this issue of, if we have a sort of mathematical scientific world, is there a world of freedom? And unfortunately, it does look like their mythologies tend to eliminate freedom, right? The Leibnizians of the world, I think because they have such a visceral psychological contact with a world of certainty, this world of these incredible ideal objects in the Fregean or Husserlian sense, the mathematical world, I think they really do sometimes psychologically, they think the rest of the world is like that. And that is the grave error of those people. Husserl's a great philosopher, and I'm not the best person to assess him, but he is great. But I think it's clear he has this weakness, right? The weakness which is central to my work of asking the question, what kind of science is philosophy? And right, Husserl's answer is, it's a strenge Wissenschaft. It's a rigorous science. And I want philosophy to be rigorous as much as the next person. But whatever philosophy is, it isn't like mathematics, and it isn't like mathematical physics, even if it includes those somehow. And I think that is one of the really big issues. I do think we have to carve out a real space for philosophy, and that's what Heidegger was doing. But then we also need to recognize articulating the meaning of that space requires engaging with the people who are experts in these areas where we're weakened. And I don't just mean they can do the math. I mean, like the physicists I talk to are the physicists who want to talk about what physics means. That's not most of them. But I've come to perceive it is most of the really, really smart ones, or at least particularly the ones who work in the theoretical side, like of the applied math, theoretical physics side. They tend to be very interested. If you listen to people in string theory, they are very interested in this stuff because string theory has proven that theories in the physical world about nature have ended up having applications in pure mathematics, which is the first really decisive example of that going the other direction, right? Because what Wigner and everyone has been talking about since the Renaissance is, oh, isn't it incredible that mathematics applies to unexpected things in the physical world? But it turns out trying to understand things in the physical world also leads to insights in pure mathematics. And that, I think, is one of the most significant human discoveries of the past century. It's a meta-scientific discovery of the actual evolution of physics and math themselves, which have become much closer. So Daniel Tong, who's the professor of theoretical physics in Cambridge, he has a number of excellent lectures I've been listening to about this. And I am very struck by it as a philosopher. I was like, wow, this is a really important issue I need to think way, way more about because I didn't know it because I wasn't in the field. But the fact that math and physics are now working in both directions, I think means we need to get rid of the humanities science distinction, recognize all the reasons it's real, but not be wedded to it ideologically. Just like religion, forget theology. My point is when we're talking about humanity, we're doing theology. And we could say fuck the word if we want. But I think that's my point, is I don't want people to feel like they have to engage the word because we all have complicated baggage, me particularly, say, with religion as a kid. So I don't want to throw that in people's face. I'm just trying to say, somewhat controversially, the issues are actually the grammatical, substantive issues that are dealt with in the history of the highest domains of philosophical reflection. And in every tradition, from India to Neoplatonism to the Epicureans, that's a question about what are the gods like. And that's what I mean when I say the humanity question is ultimately a theological question. It's a question, what are the gods like? And you say, well, the gods don't exist. They clearly must, even if it's just a new psychological account we need, right? There's no Feuerbach without a theology faculty. And that's why I come always going back to this type of materialism I mentioned, which is we need to be a better kind of materialist that therefore asks the really hard questions about what matter really is. What is matter that math is possible? What is matter that pure mathematics ends up describing the structure of the vacuum and the quantum fluctuations? But what does that mean that, as Tong says, if you watch a lecture he gives at the Royal Institute, the math is apparently so hard that no one can solve the solution. It's one of the 7 millennium problems you win $1 million for, even though we know this is what describes this energy, this event in a vacuum. There's apparently this quantum fluctuation, but no one knows what it means because he said it's just so hard to understand. And I think that that's also a great virtue of us as philosophers also engaging in these issues, is the idea that there's problems so vastly difficult intellectually that it takes hundreds of years of the smartest people working on them. And that's, I think, the great appeal of the sciences to people, is the idea that you can make that kind of progress. And I'm very wedded to thinking in philosophy, we have to recognize we're not like that, but it's right that many philosophers have wanted to be. And I think that's what I'm trying to give an account of to myself and in my book, which is, thank goodness, it's under contract now with Columbia. So my book, I think, will be coming out in a year or early next year. But it's about these issues. Is that I'm trying to give an account of how did we evolve this radical split between what seems like human values on the one hand and the people who have all the mathematical and engineering and scientific abilities on the other. And it's not a fair division, but until we can recognize that crude division must have a crude psychological basis, which is why I think we have to invoke the infantile thing, we're going to not realize we have kind of two very scared type of infants fighting each other. An infant who thinks you control the world by literally only extending your agency, and another infant who's rightly terrified of a world in which other people's agency is meaning their world can never be stable or safe. So that's the real problem, is transhumanism. Even if everyone were a transhumanist, the logic of it is war. Because if you disagree one iota with the particular vision of one transhumanist vision, as you guys I'm sure know better than I do, having done the Nick Land course, right? You end up getting radically different kind of policy programs for self-extermination. And the very fact that it's this whole field of autogenocide, which is what I call it. Transhumanism is an autogenocidal philosophy. It's, I think, evil in that sense, not the people, necessarily the statements, but the trajectory of the philosophy is, let's destroy the human species voluntarily. So the autogenocidal dimension is the source of all the debates. Well, should we just let ourselves be destroyed? Should we actively destroy ourselves? Should we actively shed our meat bags? This kind of, it's Gnostic language. It comes out of ancient, you could read Porphyry's text on asceticism or on virginity. And the language of Silicon Valley transhumanism is literally a form of the most kind of anti-flesh forms of Platonic, Gnostic, apocalyptic philosophy, where the body is disgusting and it needs to be, and that you could say is Platonism. If you don't like Platonism, you would say transhumanism is Platonism. Yeah, transhumanism is Platonism fucked. But that's kind of the problem, is everything important is somehow Platonism fucked. Heidegger's Platonism fucked. Foucault's Platonism fucked. And it turns out there's a reason for that, because there is this really long debate. It took 2,000 years from Plato to the Renaissance to figure it out. But guess what? The math people were right, at least about the importance of math. And the people like Epicurus, who didn't have a concept even of matter that would permit it to be described by mathematical objects, they were wrong. So that doesn't mean that Epicureans weren't right. We now have atomic theories, right? There's all kinds of wonderful insights we now see were present in all the schools. But I think this is one of the really hard ones, which is, what does it mean to give an account of our humanity that does real justice to both extreme sides of the spectrum that we have divided?
I think one of the perfect sort of comments from the chat to bring in at this point would be, Watcher said, the discussion is a bit skewed by the fact that before, say, 1850, mathematicians all were also physical scientists of some sort. And then I would add to it, they were also philosophers. And so, the specialization of university, which comes with the gains, which is to say the complexity and the gains of all these different fields, has, in a sort of sense, made it almost impossible to be the polymaths that Leibniz and Descartes were. But and obviously even Heidegger, right? But after Heidegger, there's not a Heideggerian who knows math. He was the last one, and you can trace this. You can trace this split back to Husserl and Frege as like the two philosophers who really tried to think about math and logic in this. Well, think about logic in a mathematical way, vice versa, and then their disciples, Heidegger and not Wittgenstein, Russell and Heidegger went these two different routes that opened up continental philosophy on the one side and on the other analytic. And of course, now we're in a century where it's someone like Negarestani will say he does not recognize the divide, he does not operationalize the divide. But then when you read him, his functionalism, his cybernetics, his Hegel is pragmatic. It's all still, so it's like the divide is still operative. I would like to get out of the divide. I'd like to heal our split, specialized, obscene selves that are only able to do one of all of these other things that we should be juggling to be, I would say, whole people. And so really math should be probably, I don't know, on the board as one of those things that we do to be people. So you've challenged me to think about math and theology as belonging on that board. You might have to push me in that direction, or you could teach a class on it. I will sign up in a heartbeat. I would love to have you teach a class on those things. I know that I've already made the offer to have you teach a different course that you were interested in teaching. So ultimately, the transference has worked. I want to learn from you. I think you know about these things. Let's do it. But outside of that, we've got to close this out in a second. Closing statements? Anything New Year's related? Yeah. What are you gonna do to be a human? Let's close out.
Sure. Well, just first, thanks, Dave and Nance, for your time and for putting this together. I'm excited to check out the other speakers when I can see the videos. And then, secondly, I completely agree with the board. My vision of the human is we should be harmonized, right? So we need bodies that are healthy, emotions, and minds. And given that our minds can be fine-tuned as far as pure math and our bodies can be fine-tuned as far as beautiful dance and athleticism and music, I think that is my vision of the human. And I'm hoping this year, both through publishing my book, continuing my courses, doing stuff with you like this, and I'd love to teach. I certainly wouldn't do stuff on math per se, but theology I definitely know. And I know it's just a smattering about the philosophy of math as far as it's part of the philosophy and science. Because I think I want to help people have a vision that I think we share, as far as I can tell, which is whatever terms we use for things. There's basically a group of people in the world who are always discovering each other, which are trying to put everything together without cheapening anything, without faking, without acting like we don't know the thing that we have to rely on the specialist for, but at the same time without pretending that we can avoid doing that integrative work. That integrative work is the essence of our humanity, is that we are a civil war. So the human project is first pacification, then rebuilding. So, right, I think that's the human project. Becoming human is you have to start with, I'm at war with myself. There's a lot more me's than I can count. And that's pretty disturbing. Enter psychoanalysis or whatever your preferred theory is. So I think corralling our many forms of selfhood, which include the way in which the human, if you imagine the human as the psyche, the human is really divided. And I think what we're doing here, even just by being honest about it from our side, say on the humanities side, if you want to put it that way, is partly, I think we're creating a world in which the shared space that we do all of this work is philosophy as a way of life. And that's certainly what I'm arguing in my book, is that religion and science are part of the history of philosophy, and they will never be adequately integrated or understood in their distinctions until we recognize they are all part of philosophy. And that doesn't mean philosophers are the new super specialists who get to tell everyone what to do. It means philosophers are the people who become self-conscious about the task of their own humanity and then spend their life working on it, that's what I'm hoping for the new year for all of us.
Thank you, Samuel. Looking forward to talking soon. Take care.
Thinking is super uncool, and that's why you should do it. It's just like almost anything that's like cool anymore. It just sucks. And I think that's like what the underground movement has always been about, is just like seeing what's in the mainstream, being like, it ain't there, and kind of like cobbling something together, you know? And yeah, it's a little mismatched, but that's like its beauty.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, where workers with earbuds can find genuine liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
We bring primary texts from leading lights of diverse fields to bear on topical issues and works popular in our current world. Theory Underground is a publishing house as well as lecture course and social media platform.
You've been reading Underground Theory.
Yes.
And
amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run a review of books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Jesus Christ.
Seriously.
This is a little experiment in what I, David McKerracher, can pull off without relying on the academy or the algorithmic dictates of the attention economy.
Usually, a good edited collection has good essays, but you only want to read a few. Every essay makes me want to read the other essays because you have a vision. Everyone that you invited for a reason. You weren't some fake publicist. He's like, "Hey, so-and-so's a new book. Have them on your show." No, you only talk to people because you've read shit by them that you've thought about, that you think has value, even if you disagree. So I think that's what's amazing.
I believe that I am, like so many others, pioneering a future in which educators can form learning webs that will make learning as a way of life enjoyable and emancipatory. However, before these tools become accessible, they have to be experimented with. That's why I built my own website and app using nothing more than my own saved wages, 5 patrons, and some small classes of students over the last year. Of course, I also have had my wife Anne's moral support and help with accounting so that I don't get in trouble with the IRS or whatever. In less than a year, Theory Underground has already put out 8 courses, 2 books. One, my book, Timenergy, and the other, Underground Theory, which has over 30 contributors, including works written by students at Theory Underground, some of my fellow travelers, and colleagues in the broader universe of Underground Theory. Beyond the books and courses, though, you will also find interviews, reading exegetical reaction sessions, and live weekly events for working class autodidacts, independent researchers, and renegade academics. These include a variety of clubs and cohorts that meet on a weekly or monthly basis. If you want to get involved, there are 4 main subscription levels.
Think of it like a gym membership, but for your mind.
The point is to make learning, practice, and theoretical comprehension a way of life. Support at this stage of the operation is more crucial than ever because my savings were used up over the last year of getting this established. If I can triple my subscribers in the next 2 months, I can quit my gig at Amazon and focus on this work full time. All I need is a few more people at each of the levels or a couple big time patrons who just want to see it happen. Right now I am doing a patron and site subscriber drive, so excuse the commercial. But if you end up really liking what goes on at this channel, consider signing up soon. If you cannot afford it, but want to get involved with some of the stuff behind the paywall, I have made a financial aid scholarship you can sign up for here in the description. Quick side note, some people ask about the profit motive. At this point, I have not actually made a return on any of my investment in terms of the amount of time, energy that I put into things, the amount of savings I've actually put into things, the opportunity cost of the work that I'm doing as opposed to the other kinds of things that I could be doing for money. But more importantly, I don't actually make enough to pay for my cost of living. The goal is to make enough for my cost of living, and then once that is achieved, everything over that amount is going to go towards expanding the operation to the point where I can hire Michael Downs, aka Mikey of The Dangerous Maybe, to be a full-time researcher and part-time teacher at Theory Underground. All right, so with that aside, I just want to say also, if you are a worker with earbuds, what's up? I see you. I work at Amazon part-time and everything I do is for my past self who used to work there full-time. Most workers with earbuds couldn't care less about theory, but I do believe a working class intellectual revolution could grow out of the underground theory scene. My hope is that what I have built here will contribute to making the scene something more than just a scene, and you into something more than just a scene kid. We're trying to make this into a real intellectual milieu capable of leading a way forward beyond the imminent crises facing humanity. But for that, we need thinking now more than ever.
Start thinking.
I hope that you either will or have enjoyed the program, and also make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and leave this playing in the background all the time while you're doing other things.
Playing long-form Theory Underground content in the background while you do things has, in the near future, been scientifically proven to emancipate minds from the functional illiteracy imposed on workers by the structural stultification of time energy. This is achieved by reterritorializing circumspective concern.
Also, to some degree, it is for the algorithm.
Think of it like a gym membership, but for your mind!
Just want to make a quick shout out here at the end to my patrons over at Patreon. I set the Patreon up like a week and a half ago because the fact is not everybody wants to be a subscriber at my website. Not everybody wants to take courses at the website. And so if people who are looking to support in some other way, Patreon is kind of a tried and true route, and some people really prefer it. And so to those who are becoming patrons at my Patreon, thank you so much. If I can get up to $500 per month between people over at my website and people over at the Patreon and people over at the Substack, collectively, I will be able to quit the job at Amazon and do this full time. And so to the people who just started trying to make that possible over at Patreon, special shout out to Alexander, Neil, Darian Large, and Nikolai. You guys are really helping make the difference. Really appreciate it. And to anybody who becomes a subscriber or a patron here in the next month, I just want to say you get a free copy of my new book, Timenergy, Why You Have No Time or Energy. And you really incentivized me to get the audio recording of this finished, which I've been working on. So thank you. Take care, everybody.